The frost had settled thick that December morning in Portland, Oregon. Sarah Mitchell stepped onto her back deck with her coffee, breath visible in the 28-degree air. That's when she saw it, a tiny form beneath her hummingbird feeder, motionless on the wooden planks. And Anna's hummingbird, no bigger than her thumb, lay on its side. Its emerald feathers were dull, fluffed into a ball. When Sarah knelt down, the bird didn't move. Its eyes were closed. For a moment, she thought it was already gone. But then she saw it, the faintest rise and fall of its chest. Once every few seconds. Shallow. Barely there. She had no idea what she was looking at was torpor, a survival state that drops a hummingbird's body temperature from 104 degrees Fahrenheit down to barely above freezing, slowing its heart from over 1,000 beats per minute to as few as 50. The bird wasn't dead. It was hanging on by the thinnest thread of life, burning through its last reserves of energy just to make it to morning. Speaking of survival, if you want to see more rescue stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. But to understand how this tiny bird ended up here, we need to go back about 12 hours. The night before had been brutal. Temperatures plummeted to the low 20s, unusual even for a Portland winter. Most Anna's hummingbirds, year-round residents in the Pacific Northwest thanks to warming climates and backyard feeders, had found sheltered perches in dense shrubs or under eaves. They'd entered torpor hours before sunset, their bodies automatically shifting into energy-saving mode as darkness fell. But not every bird makes it through. Sometimes a hummingbird enters the night already weakened, low on fat reserves, unable to feed enough during the shortened winter days. Sometimes the cold comes on too fast. And sometimes, like this little female, a bird simply runs out of time. Sarah didn't know any of this yet. She only knew that the bird was still breathing, and that if she left it on the deck, it would be dead within the hour. Carefully, she cupped her hands around the hummingbird. It felt impossibly light, like holding air. Its body was cold to the touch, far colder than any living thing should be. She brought it inside, cradling it against her chest as she searched frantically on her phone for what to do. Every wildlife rescue site said the same thing. Do not attempt to care for hummingbirds without a license. Contact a rehabilitator immediately. But it was 6 in the morning. No one was answering. The bird was dying in her hands. Sarah made a choice. She grabbed a small cardboard box from her recycling bin and lined it with soft tissues. She placed the hummingbird gently inside and set the box near, but not directly on, a heating pad she'd set to low. Then she waited, watching the tiny chest for any change in breathing. The instructions online were clear. Warm the bird slowly. Too much heat too fast could send it into shock. Too little, and it wouldn't have the energy to come out of torpor. She adjusted the heating pad. Checked the bird every few minutes. Its eyes remained closed. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Sarah started to doubt herself. Maybe she should have left it outside. Maybe bringing it in was making things worse. But then, almost imperceptibly, the bird's feathers began to smooth down. The puffed-up fuzz ball appearance started to fade. Its body was warming. Slowly, the bird's metabolism was waking up. At the 40-minute mark, one eye opened. Just a sliver. Then both eyes, dark and aware, focused on Sarah's face hovering above the box. The hummingbird's head lifted slightly. It was alive. Fully, undeniably alive. Sarah exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But being awake didn't mean the bird was out of danger. Hummingbirds have the highest metabolism of any animal on Earth. They need to eat almost constantly, visiting hundreds of flowers a day, consuming half their body weight in sugar. After a night in torpor, after burning through precious fat reserves just to survive the cold, this bird was running on empty. Sarah knew she had to feed it. She mixed sugar water, 1 part white sugar to 4 parts water, no honey, no artificial sweeteners, nothing that could harm the bird. She poured the mixture into a shallow bottle cap and placed it in the box. The hummingbird didn't move toward it. It sat there, eyes open but lethargic. Too weak to feed itself. This was the critical moment. If the bird couldn't, or wouldn't, drink, it would starve even with food right in front of it. Sarah remembered reading something about using a straw as a makeshift feeder. She grabbed one from her kitchen, dipped the end into the sugar water, then held it near the bird's beak. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, like a switch flipping, the hummingbird's instincts kicked in. Its tongue, long, forked, capable of lapping up nectar 13 times per second, darted out. It drank. Small sips at first, tentative. Then longer pulls, the bird's throat working as it swallowed. Sarah held perfectly still, barely breathing, as the hummingbird fed for nearly 2 minutes straight. When it finally stopped, the transformation was remarkable. The bird's eyes were brighter. Its head moved with purpose, scanning the box, the room, Sarah's face. It shifted its weight from foot to foot, testing its balance. Sarah knew she had to contact a licensed rehabilitator. It was illegal to keep a hummingbird without a permit, and this bird needed more than sugar water to fully recover. Hummingbirds require protein from insects, specialized care, proper housing. But it was still early, and the nearest rehab facility was an hour away. So Sarah did the only thing she could. She stayed with the bird. She fed it every hour, offering the straw, watching as it drank greedily each time. Between feedings, she kept the box warm and quiet, checking constantly to make sure the bird wasn't overheating or showing signs of stress. By mid-morning, she'd finally reached a rehabilitator at the Audubon Society of Portland. The woman on the phone, a veteran bird rescuer named Linda, walked Sarah through the next steps. Keep the bird warm. Keep feeding it. Bring it in this afternoon. And you did exactly the right thing, Linda said. If you'd left it outside, it would be dead. Quick note, if you want to see what happened next with extended footage and updates, that's available in the membership. Links in the description. Alright, back to the story. By early afternoon, the hummingbird had regained enough strength to perch. Sarah had placed a small twig in the box, and the bird gripped it with its tiny feet, balancing perfectly. It preened its feathers, running its beak through the emerald plumage on its back, fluffing and smoothing. It looked almost normal, almost ready. Sarah packed the box carefully and drove to the Audubon facility, the heating pad tucked beneath the box to keep the temperature stable during the trip. Linda met her at the door. She was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, wearing a vest covered in pockets. She'd been rescuing hummingbirds for over 20 years. She took the box from Sarah and peered inside, her expression softening. "She's a tough little one," Linda said. "You can see it in her eyes." She explained that the bird would need to stay at the facility for at least a week, maybe longer. They'd monitor her weight, make sure she was feeding properly, check for frostbite on her tongue or feet, a common injury when hummingbirds get too cold. If all went well, they'd release her back into the wild in a location with reliable food sources and shelter. Sarah visited twice during that week. Each time, Linda brought her back to the rehabilitation room, a quiet space lined with small cages, each one housing a recovering hummingbird. Sarah's bird, now officially named Frost by the staff, was thriving. She'd gained weight. Her feathers gleamed. And on Sarah's second visit, Linda opened the cage door just slightly. Frost zipped out, a blur of green and silver, flying figure eights around the room before landing on a hanging feeder. She fed aggressively, her wings a soft hum in the quiet room. "She's ready," Linda said. The release was planned for the following morning, but Linda invited Sarah to be there. They met at a small nature reserve on the outskirts of Portland, a place thick with native plants and winter-blooming flowers that would give Frost the best chance. The temperature had climbed into the 40s, cold but manageable. Linda carried a small mesh enclosure with Frost inside. She found a clearing near a cluster of manzanita bushes and set the enclosure down. Sarah stood a few feet back, camera ready, heart pounding. Linda opened the door. For a moment, Frost didn't move. She perched on the edge of the opening, her tiny head swiveling, taking in the sky, the trees, the open air. Then she launched. She flew straight up 20 feet, 30, 50, until she was just a speck against the gray December sky. She hovered there for a heartbeat, wings beating impossibly fast. And then she was gone, disappearing into the trees. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. She hadn't expected that. The weight of it, the fragility and the resilience, the fact that this bird had been dying on her deck just 10 days ago and was now free, alive, wild again. Linda put a hand on her shoulder. "You gave her a second chance," she said. "Not every bird gets that." The drive home was quiet. Sarah kept replaying the moment frost disappeared into the trees, that final flash of green against the winter sky. But there was something else, too, a question that had been growing in her mind all week. What about the other birds? The ones who didn't make it? The ones who froze on cold nights with no one there to find them? How many hummingbirds were out there right now, struggling to survive a season they weren't meant to endure? She started researching. Anna's hummingbirds, she learned, had expanded their range dramatically over the past few decades. Once confined to California and Baja, they now lived year-round in Oregon, Washington, even parts of British Columbia. Climate change played a role. Warmer winters made it possible. But so did people. Backyard feeders, winter-blooming gardens, suburban sprawl creating warmer microclimates. The birds adapted. They stayed. And sometimes they paid the price. Quick reminder, if you don't want to miss stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Sarah became obsessed. She started keeping her feeders full all winter, checking them twice a day to make sure they didn't freeze. She planted native shrubs that bloomed in December and January. She joined a local Audubon chapter and started volunteering, learning how to identify birds in distress, how to safely warn them, when to intervene and when to let nature take its course. She met other rescuers, people who'd saved dozens of hummingbirds, who kept emergency supplies in their cars, who answered calls at 3 in the morning because someone found a bird on their porch. One woman, a retired teacher named Margaret, had been rescuing hummingbirds for 15 years. She showed Sarah her setup, a spare bedroom converted into a recovery space, with heat lamps, misting systems, carefully calibrated nectar feeders, and live fruit flies for protein. She'd saved over 200 birds. Some made it. Some didn't. "You learn to hold both," Margaret said. "The grief and the joy. They come together." Sarah asked her about Frost. Did she think the bird would survive out there long-term? Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. Hummingbirds that go into severe torpor, that get that close to death, sometimes they bounce back completely. Sometimes the stress leaves them weaker, more vulnerable to the next cold snap. There's no way to know. But you gave her the best chance she could have. That's all any of us can do. 3 months passed. Winter gave way to early spring. Sarah's garden began to bloom, columbine, salvia, fuchsia. And the hummingbirds returned. Not just Anna's now, but rufous hummingbirds migrating north, black-chinned males defending tiny territories around her feeders. Sarah watched them, captivated as always by their impossible speed, their aerial battles, their fierce will to live. She wondered sometimes if one of them was Frost. There was no way to tell. No band, no marking. Just dozens of green-backed females, all looking nearly identical. But one afternoon in April, a hummingbird landed on the feeder closest to her kitchen window. It fed for a long time, unbothered by Sarah's presence just a few feet away. When it finally flew off, it didn't go far. It perched on a nearby branch, preened for a moment, then looked directly at Sarah through the glass. For just a second, their eyes met. And Sarah smiled because whether it was Frost or not didn't really matter. Every hummingbird was a small miracle. Every one that made it through the winter was a testament to resilience. She thought about that December morning, about the frozen bird on her deck, about the choice she'd made to bring it inside. It would have been easier to walk away, to assume it was already gone, to let nature handle it. But she hadn't. And in that moment of compassion, something shifted. Not just for the bird, but for Sarah. She'd connected to something larger than herself. A fragile, beautiful web of life that existed just outside her window, mostly unnoticed, constantly at risk. The hummingbird on the branch fluffed its feathers once, then took off, disappearing into the canopy of her backyard maple. Sarah went back to her coffee, now cold, and looked out at her garden. The feeders were full. The flowers were blooming. And somewhere out there, hummingbirds were doing what they do best, surviving against impossible odds, one wing beat at a time. Linda called a few weeks later. She wanted to let Sarah know that the Audubon Society was starting a winter hummingbird monitoring program. Volunteers would check feeders at parks and nature reserves, watch for birds in distress, provide emergency care when needed. They needed people. Sarah didn't hesitate. She signed up that night. By the following winter, she was leading training sessions, teaching others how to recognize torpor, how to warm a frozen bird, when to call for help. She kept a rescue kit in her car, heating pad, small boxes, sugar packets, straws. Just in case. She used it twice that first winter. Once for a male Anna's found beneath a streetlight, too cold to fly. Once for a juvenile Rufus who'd gotten trapped in a garage overnight. Both birds recovered. Both were released. And each time, Sarah felt that same quiet awe, the privilege of holding something so small and fierce, of being the difference between life and death. But she also learned about the ones that didn't make it. The bird found too late, already stiff with cold. The juvenile who never woke from torpor. The female who'd survived the rescue but died 2 days later, her body simply too weakened to recover. Margaret was right. You held both, the grief and the joy. You learned to accept that not every story ended with a release. Some ended with a small body wrapped in tissue, buried beneath a rosebush, mourned by strangers who'd tried their best. Sarah started documenting her rescues. Photos, videos, detailed notes on each bird's condition, treatment, outcome. She shared them online, hoping to educate people, to show them what hummingbirds faced each winter, how humans could help. The response surprised her. Messages from across the country, people who'd found frozen hummingbirds, who'd thought they were dead, who now knew to check for that faint rise and fall of breath. People who'd installed heated feeders, who'd planted winter-blooming natives, who'd become part of an accidental network of rescuers scattered across the hummingbird's expanding range. One message stood out. A woman in Seattle wrote to say she'd found an Anna's on her porch in January, brought it inside, warmed it, fed it, and called a rehabilitator, all because she'd seen Sarah's videos. The bird survived. It was released 3 days later. I never would have known what to do, the woman wrote. You saved this bird as much as I did. Sarah read that message 3 times. She thought about Frost, about that December morning, about the chain of small actions that led from one frozen bird to hundreds of people learning how to help. It wasn't just about individual rescues anymore. It was about shifting how people saw these birds, not as decorations for a garden, but as wild animals struggling to adapt to a world that was changing faster than they could evolve. The reality was stark. Climate change was pushing hummingbirds into new territories, expanding their ranges north and into higher elevations. But those new habitats came with risks, harsher winters, fewer native food sources, longer nights. Hummingbirds were trapped between two worlds, the warming climate that allowed them to survive in places they'd never lived before, and the brutal cold snaps that still came, that still killed. They needed help. Not just from rehabilitators and wildlife centers, but from regular people willing to keep a feeder full, to plant the right flowers, to know what to do when they found a bird in trouble. Sarah's garden had become a sanctuary. By her 3rd winter of rescuing, she'd identified 7 different Anna's hummingbirds that regularly visited her feeders. She knew them by subtle differences, a slightly brighter gorget, a missing tail feather, a particular perching preference. She watched them through the seasons, through courtship dives in February, nest building in March, the arrival of fledglings in April. And she watched them prepare for winter, bulking up on insects, defending the richest food sources, finding sheltered roosts as the days shortened. She still didn't know if Frost was among them, but she liked to think so. Liked to imagine that the frozen bird from her deck 3 years ago was now a veteran survivor, raising her own chicks, teaching them the rhythms of a Portland winter. It was a comforting thought. Probably not true, but comforting nonetheless. For members, we've got the full follow-up story with video updates on the birds Sarah's been tracking. Links below. What Sarah did know was this: every hummingbird mattered. Every rescue, every heated feeder, every winter-blooming garden. They were small acts in the face of enormous challenges: habitat loss, climate change, the relentless pressure of a human-dominated world. But they added up. Bird by bird, garden by garden, person by person. They created a network of care that stretched across cities and states, connecting strangers through a shared love of these impossible little creatures. One February morning, Sarah was giving a talk at a local library about winter hummingbirds. About 50 people showed up, retirees, young families, college students, birders. She told them about frost, about torpor, about the delicate balance between intervention and interference, about the simple things anyone could do to help. When she finished, a man in the back raised his hand. "I found a hummingbird last week," he said, "on my driveway. I thought it was dead. But I remembered seeing something online about checking for breathing, so I did. And I saw it. Just barely. So I brought it inside." Sarah's heart jumped. "What happened?" "I warmed it up, like you said. Fed it sugar water. Called the Audubon Society. They came and got it." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "They released it yesterday. Held it. They said it wouldn't have made it if I'd left it outside." The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone. Not for Sarah, but for the man, for the bird, for the fragile, surprising resilience of life. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes again. She'd cried more in the past 3 years than in the previous decade. But they were good tears. Necessary tears. The kind that came from bearing witness to something worth protecting. After the talk, people lingered. They asked questions, shared their own stories, took pamphlets on native plants and winter bird care. A teenager showed Sarah a photo on her phone, a blurry shot of a hummingbird at a feeder. "I've been watching this one all winter," she said. "I named him Jasper. He comes every morning at 7:15. "Exactly." Sarah smiled. "Keep watching," she said. "You never know what you'll see." The truth was, most hummingbirds would never need rescuing. Most would navigate winter just fine, their bodies perfectly adapted to enter torpor on cold nights, to wake with the dawn and feed furiously, to survive on the edge of possibility. But some wouldn't. Some would get caught by a sudden freeze, or weakened by illness, or simply unlucky. And for those birds, having someone who knew what to do, someone willing to try, made all the difference. Sarah thought about this on her drive home. About the thousands of hummingbirds living in Portland now, darting between feeders and fuchsias, defending territories no bigger than a backyard. About the invisible threads connecting them to the people who fed them, watched them, cared whether they lived or died. It was a kind of reciprocity, she realized. The birds brought beauty, wonder, a flash of wildness into human lives. And in return, humans offered food, shelter, and sometimes, when it mattered most, a second chance. She pulled into her driveway as the sun was setting. The temperature was dropping, another cold night ahead. She checked her feeders, making sure they were full, then went inside. Through the kitchen window, she could see a single hummingbird perched on the edge of her nectar feeder, drinking in the fading light. Its gorget flashed ruby pink as it turned its head. Then it was gone, disappearing into the dusk to find its roost, to settle in for another long winter night. Sarah stood at the window for a long time, watching the empty feeder sway slightly in the breeze. Tomorrow it would be full again. Tomorrow the birds would return. Tomorrow someone, somewhere, might find a frozen hummingbird and know exactly what to do. Because Sarah had shared Frost's story. Because one rescue had become many. Because small acts of compassion rippled outward in ways you could never predict. She thought about Frost one more time, the weight of that tiny body in her hands, the impossible cold, the moment when those dark eyes opened and locked onto hers. She didn't know where Frost was now. Didn't know if she'd survived that first winter or the ones that followed. But she knew this, for one morning in December, a hummingbird's life had hung in the balance, and someone had chosen to care. And that choice had changed everything.